All right, hello and welcome everybody to our intro to GraphQL workshop. We'll get started here in a minute, but first, let's start with a nice, fun music video. All right, and hello everybody, and welcome to our Introduction to GraphQL workshop. I am David Jones-Gilardi, joined today by Kirsten Hunter. Hello, Kirsten.
Hey, how's everybody going?
Hopefully we're doing all right now. So if we can get a sound check, give us a thumbs up if you can hear us and you can see us. That'll be good to know. Awesome, Cedric. Thank you. And thank you, Rags. I see that. And of course, Barbaro, thank you for the workshop series. Thank you for coming. We appreciate that. All right, awesome, great. I see a bunch of thumbs up. Sounds like you can hear us loud and clear. With that, let's go ahead and get into some content and get started today, because as usual, we have a ton of things to go through with you. So it is not just myself and Kirsten with us today. We have a whole host. For those of you who have joined us before, you might notice this page keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Right? So we have added some new folks, more advocates to the team, more team members. So we have a whole host of people that are supporting in the chat and everything like that. It's not just myself and Kirsten. And the point of us really telling you that is this is meant to be interactive, right? We're all learning here in this intro to GraphQL. Ask your questions. Don't be shy. We'll do our best to get to everything from that standpoint. Okay, so just a couple housekeeping items. One, since the question always gets asked and usually asked a lot, yes, this stream is in fact being recorded. So if at any point, if you need to leave or something, you can always come back and just replay it or something. It is at the same link you're watching now, right? So if you're watching the stream, then this is the one you come back to watch the recording later. Up in the top right-hand corner, you may notice Discord. So while we have the YouTube chat, and the YouTube chat is great and all that, and the vast majority of you are there, it doesn't offer some of the nice features that Discord does, like one, persistence. So once the session ends, the chat will stop. But if you want to continue a conversation, let's say you're doing some of the homework and you have a question or something like that, join our Discord server. As a matter of fact, Ryan, let's see, I believe Nightbot, if I say bang Discord, it should give you the link to our Discord server, right? So it'll drop that. And if at any point you also want to get to link the Discord or something like that, just do bang Discord and you'll see that show up.
Did we set up Bang Menti?
Yeah, I believe Bang Menti is also a thing, and I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment. So you notice there on the bottom, menti.com. So that is the tool that we use. We're going to ask you a couple questions in the beginning, but then we're going to have a swag quiz at the end. So if you stick with us to the end, we'll do a swag quiz. We'll test your knowledge, and if you were actually listening, hopefully I don't put you to sleep today, and then you can play. So we'll do that here in a moment. Okay. A little bit more on the housekeeping, some of the tools that we're going to use today. If you're not familiar with GitHub, that is a version control source tool up in the web. It's actually between GitHub and GitLab. I think it's got pretty much everyone covered when it comes to using Git. So GitHub is the repository that we're going to use today. We will share that with you. Again, if you do bang GitHub in the chat, it'll actually give you the link as well. So everything we do today in this workshop will be in the GitHub repo. The slides, the exercises, everything you need is there. All of the tools that we're going to use today are up in the cloud. We're going to provide you with everything. Now, one thing I would like to mention, even though we do provide all of the code and stuff like that up on Gitpod, and it's a cloud-based IDE, by the way, all that is free. If you want to do this on your own machine, there's no reason why you can't. Just know that is considered a more advanced path, where with Gitpod and everything, we have pre-configured pretty much everything to get it going for you. So I would really suggest that if you're intending to follow along with us today, that you do it with us in Gitpod, because that's going to be the path that we're all going to go with. But again, if you want to do it locally, there's no reason you can't. It's just really more advanced. And then finally, at the bottom, you'll see the AstroDB tools. So as part of this workshop, we're not only going to talk about, like what is GraphQL and get into that and such like that, but we're also going to do some experimenting. We're going to experiment with a GraphQL server that is implemented in Java using the Netflix DGS framework. We're also going to have stuff on the front end with React.js, where we're then, essentially digesting all of that server-side stuff into our front end, where we can then see it rendered and all that. We're also, though, going to hook up to an actual database, a data layer with AstroDB, also using GraphQL, right? We're going to do all of that today. So these are the tools that you should be aware of. And again, everything that we do is free. If you've never been with us before, all the tools, there's nothing that you'll ever have to pay for. You may have to register for something, but that'll be it. Okay, now I saw this question coming up a couple times. Is there a certificate for this workshop? There is no certificate for attending the workshop. However, if you would like to earn a nice badge, one that you can put in like your LinkedIn featured section and such like that, then what you can do is not only attend today like you're doing, but then complete the homework. And we have detailed what the homework is in the repo. I will point it out later. And as long as you complete that homework, you submit it, and all the instructions you need to do that are actually in the repo, then you can earn yourself a nice little badge. It looks like this, the GraphQL Workshop 1. And like I said, then you can use that for bragging rights. So again, there's no certificate, but there is a badge that you, in fact, can earn for attending today and doing the homework. All right. Mega says, what are the prerequisites to attend the workshop? I would say in this case, from a tools perspective, none, because we're going to provide everything for you from that standpoint. From a knowledge standpoint, having a little knowledge of how React works is probably not such a bad thing. Is it absolutely needed? No. I will try to do my best, and same with Kirsten, to kind of explain some of the various pieces, but we're not going to be getting like deep into React or anything. If you are someone though who's like, hey, I've never done React before, say something in the chat, because we have resources for you, right? We actually have other workshops that you can go through that'll bring you through that experience. But I would say, if anything, a little bit of experience in React would probably help, but it's not absolutely needed. Definitely. All right. So, oh yeah, go ahead. Oh, okay. You were just seconding.
I was just saying, yeah.
All right. So let's go to menti.com. All right. This is where I'm going to ask you some questions. So notice you should have a code on your screen, a QR code that you can scan with your phone, or if you have the code there. As a matter of fact, let's go bang Menti in the chat. I see our Mohan not worked on React. Okay.
We have a lot of people who haven't worked with React before.
Okay, so. Well then, what we'll do is, oh, thank you. Ryan just dropped the React workshop. Ryan, can you also drop that into Discord? We have other people who have not worked in React there. Naveen, my DB is in standby mode. How can I move it back? You don't need to. You just need to start interacting with it again. It'll kick on by itself. This is from the GraphQL standpoint. Yes, this is for beginners. Like I was mentioning a moment ago, from the code standpoint, it would help if you have some understanding of things like React, but if you don't, that's totally okay. Okay. All right, let's see how we're doing on the Menti. Oh, my box is going to be laggy today. Fun. Laggy box, laggy box. I'm stuck on this screen. Uh-oh. Let's see. Oh, go to menti.com. Yeah, not Mentimeter. Menti.com. I'm actually stuck on this screen. There we go. Let me see if Menti will free me. Come on, Menti. Let me do it. It's not responding. All right. Here. You're seeing fourth wall. Give me a second here. Menti has decided that it does not want to allow me to do that screen again, so...
No, absolutely. React is not necessary at all. It's just a type of an API. So
yeah, that's right.
It's document. It's not necessary, but that's how we're showing it to you today.
Exactly. Thank you, Kirsten. All right, so I got back to the Menti screen. Let's go into the questions there. Kind of locked up for me, or on me. All right, so I saw a bunch of you were in. Awesome. So first question I have for you is, how much experience do you have with GraphQL? Okay, we have some folks who've used a little bit. Oh, we have a GraphQL master who's jumped in. I wonder if there's like one person. All right, it looks like the vast majority of folks have either never heard about it or they maybe know the concepts, right? Some folks that use it here and there. So Dextros, we are going to talk about what GraphQL is here really soon. All right, thank you for answering that. Let's go to our next question. So which APIs are you developing? And you can pick multiple. And I recognize this isn't all of the APIs in the world and stuff, but kind of the main ones. Yeah, a lot of RESTful, right? Always folks have RESTful. I always love the SOAP web services help me. Honestly, I used to really enjoy SOAP back in the day. It was such a, it was so nice, so much nicer than what we had before. God, at the time, it's so funny how every time we have a new bit of technology, it makes the other one that we had just look like terrible. Like we were, how barbaric were we in the years prior? So we have a good amount of folks, Kirsten, who are in fact using GraphQL APIs. That's wonderful. Got a lot of REST. Well, guess what? For you RESTful folks, a lot of the comparisons that we're going to use today are actually going to be between GraphQL and REST. So that's actually good because hopefully a lot of you who are already familiar with REST, you'll start to see some of the pros and cons of GraphQL, right? There's benefits back and forth, really. RESTful is life. Nice, Adventure House. All right, so thank you, everybody. I appreciate you answering those questions. Leave this window open because we're going to come back to it, and we're going to get back to it for the swag quiz. Harshada, if you're unable to find the Menti code in the chat, I'll do it now. Do bang Menti, and bang is an exclamation point, and that should give you the link to that. But we're going to move away from Menti now and get into some of the content. Okay, so basic agenda. What are we doing, right? Now, the first thing I'm actually going to do in just a moment, for those of you who are especially wondering what GraphQL is, I'm going to just briefly kind of give the why. What is GraphQL? Why is it cool, right? And then we're actually going to go right into our DB setup and credentials. And really what we're doing here is we kind of have a whole system for you set up between the database, front-end app, a back-end app, and everything. We need to launch our IDE and kind of get the environment going. And that's going to take a moment to bake, right? It's going to bake for a moment. So we're going to start with that, get it all up and going. Then we're going to move over into the introduction to GraphQL design. We'll actually start talking about that while that stuff is baking. And then by the time that's done, we can get into the GraphQL tooling and the back end and such like that. So we'll look at some of the tools, some of the GraphQL IDEs that you can use to explore your schemas and query and mutate and such like that. We'll briefly look at a very simple backend that exposes a GQL endpoint that was created with the Netflix DGS framework. So Netflix actually has a really awesome GraphQL backend framework that they give you full tutorials, Spring Initializer and stuff on. And as a matter of fact, the app that we have is actually a basic version of that, really. Then we'll move in to then consume the GraphQL endpoint that we've created, not only from the Java end, but then also from the database as well. And that's where we'll be doing that in React.js. And then finally, we'll finish up with some resources. Alrighty. So let me just really quickly, I want to give you an idea of the types of things that you're going to be doing and what you're going to see. So hopefully you can see my screen. Let me know. I've tried to, I tried to already kind of pre-zoom in for everybody. Let me know if you need to be.
Seems like a good size. The code is still a little small.
Yeah, you know, I can zoom this in a little bit. Unfortunately, it starts taking up all my screen real estate, but yeah, I'll try to make this better. Now, don't forget that we are all going to do this together. So you're going to see this as well. I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things to expect. So on the left-hand side here, here's our React app. Notice, and again, you haven't actually stood this up yet. You're going to here soon. But all I really want to point out here is that I have a set of really React components that are spitting out these sections, like shows local, genres local. We have this shows by name with the AstroDB and an on purpose error that we'll talk about later. Really, this is the end result, right? This is consuming our GraphQL endpoints and then injecting the results dynamically into the DOM with React.js, right? So this is, at the end of things, something similar to what you should see from that standpoint. On the right-hand side, you can see we have our graphical IDE. So this is one of the GraphQL IDEs that we're going to use today. And here are actually some GraphQL queries. I'll break them down a little bit later. We'll talk about them and everything. But then you can use a tool like this to explore your GraphQL schema, the data in your endpoint, and perform queries and such. So this is one of the tools that when you launch your IDE and everything, this will come up. On the bottom here, it's not as important that you can actually read the text. This is actually the Java backend running. So you'll notice every time I perform a query, you can just see that it's spitting out some very, very simple logs. That is just to kind of give that, connection, if you will. Like, okay, I did the query, it hit the back end. Oh, I saw the back end do something, right? That's all that's really there. So this is the general setup that you'll have. And then, of course, we'll have the database piece and everything. But I wanted to give everybody kind of just a feel for what that looks like so you know what to expect coming up. Okay. All right, let's pop back over. How are we on questions, Kirsten? Let's see.
We're okay, although Savarna is kind of pointing someone to GraphQL Playground, which is not what we're using. So it won't have the things set up that we have set up in the GitHub.
And interestingly enough,
that's a possibility, but we're not going to be able to support them on that path.
No, I will tell you, Savarna, if you are an advanced enough GraphQL user that you know how to hook up your own GraphQL IDE through the GraphQL endpoints that we have at it, right? That's actually really awesome. We will, in fact, be using the GraphQL Playground when we get to the AstroDB section, because that does, in fact, have the Playground embedded. I believe if you're calling it the GraphQL Playground, I believe it's the same one. So we'll see. Let's see. Harshada, how should this setup be done by us? So in a moment, once we get through a couple slides, we're going to start spinning up the environment. What's going to happen is I've pre-baked pretty much everything in Gitpod YAML. If you take a look at the Gitpod YAML, that's one way if you want to do this yourself locally, you can see the kind of resources you need. I'll make sure to point that out when we go to do it. And this is all online, right? We have provided everything up for you on the cloud, so you don't actually have to download anything. And yes, Gaurav, we will be doing some mutations, right? We'll be doing some queries and mutations. Okay. All right, with that, so let's just talk a little bit about GraphQL itself and what it is, where did it come from? So cool enough, GraphQL actually was initially created by Facebook so many years back, and they had originally used it for their mobile apps. Now, one of the things that you're going to find out about GraphQL, and one of the things that makes it cool, this is one of the reasons why it's cool, is because it gives you explicit control over the fields and the payload that as a consumer on your client that you get back. Right? If you compare that to something like a REST endpoint or whatever, you'll access that REST endpoint and then you're going to get the payload back. Even if I'm going to be absurd here for a moment, even if you had 1,000 columns of data, you're going to get that whole payload back. But in GraphQL, if you have 1,000 columns of data, you can specify just 2, and you only get back exactly what it is you ask for. And the reason why this is important for mobile apps, especially back in 2012, right, is just bandwidth when it comes down to it. You don't have the same kind of bandwidth requirements on a mobile device that you might have in a desktop app or a web app or something like that. So Facebook, that was one of the reasons why they had created it, was to really optimize the experience for mobile in the mobile experience by significantly decreasing the amount of network bandwidth and such that was needed. So GraphQL has baked in a lot of flexibility that you'll see. Eventually, what it comes down to is they open sourced it. Interestingly enough, by the way, Facebook was also the company originally behind Cassandra, which is what AstroDB is built on. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But hey, kudos to Facebook for open sourcing really cool stuff. So, Facebook open sources it. GitHub announces a move to GKL. There are actually, Netflix is a big GraphQL user. There are a ton of folks out there, even though GraphQL is still somewhat new, right? It's gotten a pretty good amount of adoption, and it's very flexible and neat. So overall, GraphQL, as you can see there on the right-hand side, it's an API, right? So if you're used to REST or gRPC or SOAP or WebSockets, or any of those are APIs, right? There are ways that our applications can talk to other services, whether they're other applications or they're backend databases or something like that. GraphQL is no different from that standpoint. It's another API, right? Now it provides, though, both front-end query language, services, and then server-side runtime piece. So and we're going to explore both of those today. That's exactly why, if you're curious, like why did you mention Java and React.js? That's exactly why. So we'll see some examples of both. Okay. Oh, yeah, Severio, if you want the Gitpod link, or if anybody wants a Gitpod link, in the YouTube chat, do bang Gitpod. I'm going to do it right now. There it goes. And that will drop you the link, and you can go right to the repo.
And I do want to do a heads up here. I see some people who are like, well, I could just use VS Code on my own system. And yes, you can.
Yeah.
But that is not the path that we are covering here. So if you run into something that doesn't work because you don't have the environment that we created for the Gitpod repository, you're going to have to figure that one out yourself. So
yeah, and if you are, by the way, I'm also using VS Code on my own system. Yeah, and it's totally fine. But to Kirsten's point, and you'll see that when we launch Gitpod, we've pre-configured a lot of things for you. The reason why we're using Spring Boot with Java on one side, we're using Netlify actually on the other with serverless functions. If you're not familiar with those things, it's not that hard to set up, but it's much easier if we just launch you up in Gitpod. So yes, you can totally do this on your own. It just might take a little bit more work. Okay, so why GraphQL then? Now I started talking about that a little bit a moment ago with the why of where Facebook came up with GraphQL and everything like that. But what is it that GraphQL really provides? The first thing on the left-hand side, you see that to describe your data, right? So you can explicitly define what your GraphQL schema is going to be. And what's cool about this, if you look at that example, you see where it has, I'm going to say, maybe I want to have some type, right? This is going to be something that maybe I'd be querying against in GraphQL called project. And within that type of project, I have fields. And this would be a way that I would define the schema for my project type. And I'm just saying, hey, it's got these 3 fields, name, tagline, and contributors. Then, and I see your question, Rajiv, can't we control the response fields and REST also by specifying? You can to some degree. However, Rajiv, to the REST piece, you have to do a lot more work to do it, where it's kind of natural in GraphQL to be able to do it. So there's some balancing act here, totally. Then, based off of that schema, on when you're consuming GraphQL at the query or even at the mutation or something like that, then you can just specify exactly which fields you want, right? And that is basically, that's a direct line to whatever has been defined in its schema are exactly the fields that you can get. And not only that, GraphQL is strongly typed, right? And it also means it really translates into you get predictable results. You only get back exactly the fields that you request. And because it is strongly typed, you know exactly what types of fields that you are getting. Okay, so then is the AstraDB part. So where does this come into play, right? So as I mentioned, we're going to use the Java backend with the Netflix GGS framework as a simple example of a GraphQL server-side backend. But then we're also going to use a real database that's also powered by GraphQL, and that's where AstraDB comes in. So there is a layer in Astra called Stargate that is actually open source. Stargate.io is open source, and it provides a whole set of ubiquitous APIs like GraphQL, REST, gRPC, things like that. On top of Apache Cassandra is really what it was, or what it is. And we're going to use the GraphQL portion and the GraphQL playground of that today. So when we power up our database, then we'll be hooking right into the GraphQL endpoint that you get via Stargate and Astra. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to go ahead. We're going to create our Astra database. We're then going to create an authentication token, right? Because this is a cloud-based service. And then that is going to give us access to this. And then once we have that, we'll spin up our Gitpod. We'll start going with some of the code and everything, and we'll hook things up. Alrighty. All right, with that, let's see. How are we doing on questions, Kirsten?
It looks like we have a lot of people trying to jump ahead.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's fine, but we're going to try to focus the comments in the YouTube on what's actually happening right now.
Okay. Okay. So what I'd like you to do now, if you're going to follow along, I'm going to do this with you, but if you're going to follow along, then let's go ahead. Thank you, Nightbot. Nightbot. That's the Gitpod one. Oh, that's a different one. I want GitHub. There we go. I'm going to drop the Nightbot link. Again, if you want the link to the repo, I will drop, you say bang GitHub, and there it goes. And then for those of you in Discord, I have not forgotten you. I will go ahead and get that to you as well. Here is the GitHub. There you go. All right, so again, if you're going to follow along, this is where you want to go. Okay, all right, so hopefully you see my screen, and I'm in the repo here on the left-hand side. Now, these repos are built to be completely self-service, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of extra stuff, text and things that are in there that I'm going to pretty much skip on because I'm talking to it, right? I'm not going to just read all the text or anything like that, but I'm going to go through the various steps. If you want to go back at any time and do this completely on your own, this is actually, by the way, this is part of the homework, right? So for those of you who want to earn badges, this is part of the homework. But you can always go back and do this on your own. I do want to just point out a couple things, that all of the resources that have been used for all of this, I've tried really hard to make sure that they're all linked here, and I have a resources section as well. So for those of you who are, say, interested in using the Netflix DGS framework for a GraphQL server backend, that's there. If you're interested in, doing stuff on the React end, that's there, so on and so forth. The last thing I want to say about the beginning part of the repo here is right here. So this is kind of a companion to our Netflix clone. We have a Netflix clone workshop that uses GraphQL to create a very, very simple Netflix clone. What actually kind of happened is a lot of people in that workshop weren't familiar with GraphQL. So we essentially devised this workshop as being like a prologue to that, if you will. So once you're done with this, if you want to then go try your hand at building the Netflix clone, then that is the link that you see here.
So I do want to call out Tanuja. CQL is not what we're covering here. There's lots of courses we have on Intro to Cassandra and using Astra, but we're not really covering CQL here. We're covering the GraphQL interface.
Yeah, I mean, ask your questions, and actually that's a great time to go to the Discord channel, right? So if you have follow-up questions or things that maybe are kind of a little bit out of the scope of the stuff, go to the Discord channel, ask us on Discord, and we're more than happy to answer. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. Just a couple things, by the way, for those of you who are asking about, hey, can't I do this in my own VS Code? We do have a FAQ, and in the FAQ, it says, hey, can I run this on my local computer? Yes, you can. We'll tell you things like, hey, you need Node 15, you need NPM 7. We'll use the Netlify CLI. Again, if you're following along for what we do in Gitpod, you don't need to worry about that. That's just really for the people doing it locally. Like I said, it's more advanced. Everything we're going to do is free. I just want to make sure that's very clear. You will need a GitHub account because to use Gitpod, you will need to have a GitHub account from that standpoint. And just a couple other things just to point out is the slide deck and everything, all the detail we get in there, that's all here. The homework section, this is what I was mentioning before. Here are the instructions for it. You see this link at step 4. You just click that, it'll submit an issue. You just fill it out, and that's all you need to do. And then all of these resources, right? This is what I was talking about. I tried to explain these as best as possible so you kind of know what they are. There are some really cool resources here, especially if you're looking for GraphQL IDEs, a really awesome video by Ali Spittle for GraphQL starters. There's actually a ton of information out there in GraphQL. So there's plenty to digest for sure. Alrighty. Ankur, AstraDB does not need to be set up on local. It's actually all cloud-based. Everything we're going to do today is completely cloud-based. All right, so what I'd like you to do is follow me here to step 1, log in or register to AstraDB and create database. So what you'll see is this big orange create AstraDB button right here. Now, for all of the buttons and links that are in GitHub Markdown, they don't allow target blank. So that means they won't automatically launch into another browser tab. So what I suggest is either right click, say open a new tab, middle click, control click, however you want to do it. Just kind of get used to doing it that way so it doesn't just launch in the tab you're currently in. Now, if you've never been to Astra before, you'll be asked to register. Again, that is completely free. You can use your GitHub account. You can use a Google account. You can just put in your own kind of authentication if you want. That's totally up to you. I've already obviously logged in before, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. And then you should, once you log in, I'll give you all a minute to get registered and stuff like that if you haven't done it before. Once you log in, you should get to a screen that looks something like this, right? You'll see these create database buttons and such. Now, I have a bunch of databases because I do stuff in here all the time. but you probably won't if you're brand new. So what you'll want to do once you get to the screen is create database. I'll click on this. And once you do that, you should get to a screen that looks like this. So what I'd like you to do is, if you've gotten here, give us a thumbs up in the chats. Let us know that you've gotten here. And by the way, you don't have to wait for me. I'm just going to start filling stuff out and talking. I just want to get a sense, for the registration and stuff, if everyone's getting to where they need to be. Oh, hey, Orlando, how you doing? Awesome, thank you. Of course, you have one. You've been with us before. All right, so you'll notice as we go down through the instructions in step 1A, I'm actually going to give you the database name and the key space, right? That's these fields here, database name and key space. I'm going to fill out the database name and the key space. And if you're curious what the key space is just the container of tables, right? So if you're coming from the relational world, relational database world, that'll be like a schema or a database in that world. That's what Cassandra calls it, is a key space. So we want to use the values here, by the way. Why? Because all of the stuff in the workshop is using these values, right? So if you deviate away from this, then things aren't going to work, right? In your own databases, when you're experimenting on your own, you can do whatever you want. But I asked that today, you use these values. Then in the provider and region section, right, you can choose any of these cloud providers. There is no hidden cost here or anything like that. I'll just choose Google Cloud today. We handle this all in the background as part of Astra. So you don't need an account with them or anything. And this is partially about flexibility. So you can choose whatever provider you want. We actually just released a new multi-region feature that allows you to span data centers over multiple regions. That's totally out of scope of today, but I was just saying that it's there. But all you really need to do here is pick a provider. It doesn't matter which one. Pick an area close to you. I'm in North America, so I'm going to do that. I'm closest to Virginia, so I'll do that. And then create database will light up and hit the button. Yeah, Manny, there might be some similarities from that standpoint, but that's not intended for sure. Then once you've created the database, you should see something that looks like this. It'll say pending or initializing. That's totally fine. You can move on, right? So you want to get to this part. Let's see. And again, it'll say pending or initializing. How are we doing on the stream and everything like that? Are we looking good? I saw Bernard say, what happened? So I was hoping my screen didn't die.
No, it looks okay to me. I think we're good. It looks pretty clear. And the questions are moving on from getting set up. So I think we're good.
Yeah, PWR Pro, you shouldn't have to worry about credits or anything like that. Maybe you can give a little bit more detail or follow up or reach out on Discord, do the Bang Discord, and get some help there. Adventure House, yes, you can totally use your previous token. If you've been with us before, you've created a security token, you can absolutely do that.
PWR Pro, I think you have 5 databases already. You can only have 5. So you can have as many key spaces as you want in a database, but individual databases, you can only have 5 at this point.
All right. So hopefully you are at a point where, again, you have a pending or initializing database. It could also already be active. Once you're there, the next thing we want to do is now go to create a security token. Step 2, right? Now, this is really important because this is a cloud-based database, right? So it's publicly available. You don't want to just have it wide open to everybody. You need an authentication token. This is actually how all the major cloud providers, everybody does it this way. By the way, notice that in any of these sections, there's this little show me drop downs. They're nice little animated GIFs that kind of show you how to do things as well. So what you can do, there's 2 ways that you can get your token. One, you can click the little ellipsis on the right-hand side and go to generate a token. That is my preferred way to do it. And again, notice I middle clicked, or you can say open link in a new tab. I want to save this for later. So I just open in a new tab. Another way you can do it is up on the top left-hand corner. You can click the drop down, go to organization settings. Again, I'm just going to put it in a new tab. Oh, there it goes. I was being lazy. Okay. And what that'll happen is, so if I went to the one from the ellipsis, it goes right to the token management section. If I use the drop down like I did a second ago, right, that drop down, it will then it'll get to the same page, and you'll see the token management page. But what you want to do is you want to click on either it goes to token management or you just click on token management. Either one, doesn't matter. Once you're here on this page, you want to select a role. In this case, your role will be database administrator. And then say generate token. Now here's something important about this. When you get this token, you only ever get it once. You will never be able to get it again for security reasons. So it is important that you download the token details. That way, as Adventure House was just asking, you can use it later because then you can use that for communication with the database. Now, the reason why I put this in another tab is because there's a nice little copy widget right here. I'm going to use this later, so I'm just going to leave this up. But again, if you're doing this, download the token details. That way, if you ever navigate away from this page, you don't lose your token. Okay?
And don't fret, because if you go away from this page and you lose your token and you didn't download it, it's okay. You can just make a new token.
Yeah.
You can see that David has a lot of tokens.
I have plenty, yes.
I have no idea how many tokens we have. So
yeah, totally.
If you get stuck and you lose track of where your token is, it's cool. Just come, make another one.
Exactly. Thank you. And Sapamas, after hitting create database, it's still stuck loading. That's fine. It might take a couple minutes. We're actually, even though we don't really focus on the AstraDB part, you're actually spinning up a fully fledged Cassandra cluster when you click that button. So it might take a couple minutes. It's totally fine. We can move on to everything we're doing right now. And then I saw another question from Majalik. How do we see the step-by-step directions? In the YouTube chat there, do bang, I'm going to do it for you. Do bang GitHub. And that right there, you should see it. The Nightbot will drop you a link. That'll bring you to the repo that I'm working off of.
So it sounds like we're going a little too fast, which is not.
Yeah, I was going to repeat the token. Yeah.
What we have. So if everybody could just drop, like, if you're stuck on a piece, could you just drop a note for us so we know which parts to go over again? We're happy to go through those step-by-step instructions and make sure you have what you need. But we need to know where you're getting caught up.
Yep. And Mark Little, the role for the token is database administrator. And yes, Minjeet, I'm going to repeat how to do the token and the database part. I'm going to repeat all of that. We usually do those twice for you. So from the database standpoint, when you first register for Astra, you should come to a dashboard that looks very similar to this and have a create database button like I see here, right? So you want to click that button. And then we give you under step 1A here, we tell you what the database name and key space name are. You fill those out. That. Pick a region, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what provider or region at all. There's no hidden cost or anything. That is just part of how Astra works. You don't need accounts. It just gives you flexibility. Pick a region that is close to you. Pick a region like this. I'm in the east, so I'll pick one close to me. You'll see create database and then hit that button. That's it. That's all you need to do from the database standpoint. Okay, and then again, once you've done that, you'll see the database go pending or initialized or something like that. Now, for those of you asking about the token, how do I get to the token creation screen? There's two ways to do it. The preferred way is if you look at you should have at least one database at this point, right? And if you go to your database on the very, very right-hand side, you should have this ellipsis. And if I click that, I say generate a token. That'll bring me right to the generate a token page. That's where I was doing this earlier. Or you can go to the organization drop down here on the left, click that drop down, say organization settings, and then once you load that, go to the token management section. And then here you choose database administrator and generate token. Hopefully for those who were asking, that gave you what you need there. Awesome. Thank you, Armohan. Cool. All right, I see.
So one of the things that we haven't really covered here that I think might be helpful is to understand that these tokens are at the organization level. So your account is like an organization. So if you have 5 different databases with 62 different key spaces each, you can use the same token on all of those databases and key spaces. So don't think of it as I have to get a token for this particular database. If you've made an organization database administrator token, it'll work for all your databases.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Kirsten. Yeah, and I did see somebody ask, I think that was Tassif, who's asking, hey, I've already done another tutorial. I've got a token. You can create as many tokens as you want, as Kirsten was saying. And you could, for that one token, you can totally reuse that for your apps. Now, I will say this though, from a best practices standpoint, if you have multiple applications you are using, it's a best practice to create a token for each of them. That way, from a tracking standpoint, if you have to delete a token for some reason, you don't like wipe out access to all your apps, right? So it's a better idea to have a token per app, but you don't technically need to do that.
So Tosi, as it says on the instructions, you just want the token. The client ID and the client secret are not used for this. So
yeah, we'll get to that later, exactly. But yeah, we're only gonna worry about the token part today. But we will talk about that when we get to it. And let's see. So
Bruno,
the tokens are not.
yeah,
Tokens
okay,
are
sorry.
not specific to a key space. As Kirsten said, they're specific to your org. So let's say, like in my case, I created all these databases. One token could in fact work for all of them, right? It's not key space specific or anything like that. Kirsten, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the Astra it's not a fork of Cassandra.
Right.
It is Cassandra as a service. We're running Cassandra in the back end, and we're providing for you the hosting of that service. So it means it's managed by us. One of the things that's kind of challenging about Cassandra is that the management can be overwhelming. So we do that. We take care of that for you.
Yeah, and
so it's not a fork. It's just a service.
Yeah, and a key space is just the container of tables, right? It's just like a database or a schema from the relational database world. It's just the container of tables. So the key space that we create today, this one that is called Netflix key space, that is where we're going to contain all the tables that we're working with for our app in that domain of the Netflix key space.
Just okay, if you cannot see the Astra CS tokens unless you are on the page where you created them, or if you downloaded them with CSV. They do not show up in the token management section. Only when they are created can you get that token information. So if you don't have that anywhere, you're going to create a new token and use that Astra CS token.
Okay. So Ankur and Sagar in Discord, I see your questions. I am not ignoring you. I'm going to get to them in a moment. I want to get everybody on Gitpod. All right, so if you've gotten to the point where you've created your database, no matter what status it's in, and you've created your token, the next thing I want you to do is open in Gitpod. So again, I'm going to right-click, say open a new tab. Now this is the fun part. It's going to start spinning up all of this environment. So the Java backend, the React.js front end, the graphical piece, basic GraphQL server, all that. So we're going to let this bake. So I'd like you to, if you've gotten to the open in Gitpod spot, you've gotten to this where you're loading it, give us a thumbs up. Let us know you're here, because then after that, I am going to move into some of the GraphQL content. Let's see. Correct. I've asked you how to pronounce your name before in a previous thing, Dutsubi, and now I'm going to say it wrong. But it said, on generating a new token, that means there's no need to update our app, which uses the old token. Correct. When you generate a new token, it doesn't invalidate your previous tokens. That only happens if you explicitly delete a token, right? So your old tokens are valid, yes. All right, so I'm just gonna move a couple things around. You can see a bunch of stuff going on. NPM's gonna download the world.
Chandramouli, you just need to get to the GitHub repository. That's where the button is for launching Gitpod.
Okay. Ankur, why database administrator? Because I was being a little lazy. Could I have used a read-write API token or something? Yes. But I just being a little lazy. Sagar, can we go ahead?
We like to use that one because when we do setup things, it makes it possible for us.
It does make it easier. It's easier for our workshops. Yeah, that's what I meant by I was being lazy.
Yeah.
So Sagar, can we make a legacy system work on GraphQL? I don't see why not, honestly. Obviously, just like any change in API, you will need to then change your legacy code in order to talk to that API, but I don't see why not.
Does Gitpod still only like Chrome and Firefox? I don't think we mentioned that.
Oh, we don't need to do that here. Yeah, this is not a refer link. It should work in Safari and Brave as well. Okay. Yeah. And then Sagar also asked, how can we set up the GraphQL server? We're going to do that here in a moment. Yeah. Yeah. Matter of fact, make sure, Nirdesh, make sure you're logged in. When you go to launch Gitpod, if you get an unauthorized, you need to be logged into GitHub, right? Make sure you're logged into GitHub to launch Gitpod. Alrighty.
Yes, NPM is going to download the world because that is what NPM does.
Yes, we love NPM, but it's download the world. Okay, so let's let that bake. We're going to let that do its thing.
We need a zoom.
I'll do that when I come back. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're right. I do have to totally zoom in. I want everybody to bake there. I saw a bunch of thumbs up. So great. Now we have the environment all baking. Oh, great, Nerdesh. Yes, that means wonderful. Now let's go ahead and take a moment and go through some of the actual GraphQL content. Oh, and by the way, how do you change to dark mode? It's a setting. It's in the VS Code up in Gitpod. There is a hamburger menu to the top left. You click on that. I'm trying to remember where it is. It's easy to find, but there is a setting in there where you can change to dark mode. All right. How are we doing on questions, Kirsten? Anything we need to get to before we move on?
No, they're excited to do another thing.
Actual stuff. Let's do the stuff.
They're anxious. So
all right.
Let's make sure everybody opened Gitpod though. Can you get a thumbs up from everybody to make sure that they have their Gitpod up and running and they're ready to go?
Yeah, I did ask for that a couple minutes ago. I did see a bunch of thumbs up. I think we're still seeing some come in. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Let's get going. Well, Barat, you're not able to log in to GitHub?
Probably GitHub. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Make sure to log into GitHub.
It's not GitLab. It's GitHub.
Yeah. Yeah, make sure to log into GitHub in order for the Gitpod to work. And I see you, Dandelion. You're good. Yeah, no worries. No worries. Okay. All right. So while that's going, let's go ahead and we'll get into some of the what and why and stuff like that behind GraphQL while those things bake. So we have enough time for you to do the rest of the stuff. So the first thing, a little bit more about the what is GraphQL, right? So it is essentially, it's another web protocol over HTTP, similar to like REST would be, because we have so many REST folks in here today. The difference about GraphQL is the way that you build your schemas and that you query data, right? And it uses a tree and JSON syntax. So especially for those of you who are front-end folks, you should be very familiar with JSON. This should feel, very, very familiar, right? And you can see kind of an example of that here on the right-hand side. Now, it is strongly typed, right? That's actually really important. So you'll find that when you define, again, funny enough, in JavaScript, unless you're using TypeScript, right? Or if you're a Java person, I'm a primary Java person, I'm used to a strongly typed language, but some languages like JavaScript aren't. And, that can offer flexibility in one way, but then it can, kind of cause problems in another. The key thing though with GraphQL is that it in fact is strongly typed. So you are guaranteed that when a particular field is set to a type, then you know exactly what that type, you know what you expect. So it is a strongly typed schema and language. Here we go. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, that GraphQL allows the client to specify exactly what data it needs from a model. Going back to my absurd example, imagine incoming workshop, let's say at this type, let's say it had 1,000 fields. I don't need to get all 1,000 of those back in my payload. I can just specify exactly what I need, like this case where I'm just pulling title. And I can do that at the client. What's really cool about it too is that I don't really have a bunch of different endpoints. I don't have to track which endpoints or anything I need to get what data. I can just use that single GraphQL endpoint, and then I can change, whatever the fields are and stuff and get the data that I want. It also allows you, this is actually kind of a really neat feature, you can aggregate multiple relations in a single query. So imagine for a second that I actually had two different sources that I wanted to get data from. And something like REST, chances are, unless I had a custom REST endpoint that was made to do that one specific thing, I would have to request data from one REST endpoint and another REST endpoint, and then I'd have to put that data together in my app somehow. In GraphQL, I can actually nest this stuff into a single object in a single query. And so I make one request, right? One network request, and then I can get all of that data. And we're going to show an example of that a little bit later. You can even go so far to do joins, right? So not only can you aggregate data from multiple sources, but then you can actually do joins between them. So there's a lot of power here in the language. Now, as I mentioned, it's a strongly typed system. So you will find that there are all sorts of types that generally, if you're coding, you're going to be familiar with. Things like ints and floats, booleans, so on and so forth, right? You can also even define your own user-defined types and such. So it's pretty darn flexible from that standpoint. This is not obviously an exhaustive list or anything, but it gives you an idea of the types that are there. And by the way, just kind of a note of something I've come across before, that they have a ton of built-in scalar types. And even though you can make your own custom types, it's better to use always the default scalars that are there first, unless you have to do something particularly special. All right, so now from a schema definition standpoint, so this is where, and we'll experiment with this a little bit on the Java end of it. So here on the right-hand side is an example of defining our schema, right? So this is something I would actually specify in a schema file. Notice what I'm saying here is I have some type, I define these. So my type query, and for a type query, let's say I'm going to look for a hero, right? Now here's what I want to point out. This is something cool that GraphQL does. Notice what this is pointing to. It's not just saying that it's a string or an int. It's not just using a scalar. It's actually referencing character. So what's cool about GraphQL is that you can reference other types. You can reference other objects in there. So what's actually going to happen is my query, then the hero field will actually reference the character type. And then look, oh, we're building the character type. And now I've got, a name for my character. I have friends. Oh, look, that's an array, right? I have an array of characters. I can self-reference, right? So notice that I'm referencing the very type that we're creating. So you can, it's definitely a little bit more complex model for sure, but this ability to be able to reference other types in your schema is actually really powerful, and you'll see some examples where this comes into play. And again, another example of this, I have a homeward field that I'm then referencing with the planet type. Oh, look, I've got a planet type down here, and I define its parameters, so on and so forth. Now, how does that translate into what the query looks like, right? So if we take a look here on the left-hand side, let's say I wanted to query by something like this. I want to get a hero. Well, remember, a hero is in fact a character, and a character has a set these fields here. So notice that the fields that I have here, things like name, they have to coincide exactly, right? And one of the cool powers of GraphQL, we'll get into this part a little bit later, is there's an ability here, like there's validation. There's a validation layer in GraphQL that will not allow you to query outside of fields and types and stuff that don't exist in your schema. So whatever is defined here, this is exactly what you can query from. And what's cool is you can introspect and you can look into that schema without executing queries first. And actually, a lot of the IDEs, they do that for you. And you'll see that a little bit today. We're going to play with that. So they do that part for you, and you can use that to explore what the schema is well before you even execute your first query, right? But really what I want to point out is that these fields match exactly. Notice friends, right? Again, this is a character. So in character, friends is a string of characters. I'm sorry, an array of characters. I said that weird. You see I have my friends here then. And since those are characters, they also have names. They have homeworlds, right? A homeworld is a planet, which has a name and a climate. You can see this kind of nested structure, right? So one thing to kind of point out about it is that compared to like REST, GraphQL is more complex, no doubt, but it offers up a ton of flexibility. So once you get used to kind of the feel of kind of how you query and how you chain down things, the flexibility that's there is really awesome. But yes, it is a little bit more complex than what we'd expect with a REST endpoint. Okay, so if we then take a look at a GraphQL query, what's a query? So a query is what you're going to use to query data and perform read-only requests, right? That's a key thing here. So the query is the actual nomenclature that we would use when we want to then query our GraphQL endpoint. And that is going to be responsible to fetch the data that is being offered up, right, from our GraphQL endpoint. So query is the way that you're going to read your data. And queries are declarative.
Notice here, there actually was a question, and I want to say here that go back to where you were, the slide before with speakers on it. I wanted to just point out that in this case, he's actually asking specifically just for the name of the speakers, right? So there was a question: do you have to get the whole thing back? No. If you get a character. No, you can just say, I want the character and I just want the name of the homeworld, and that's it. It's one of the great things of GraphQL. So this was, the next slide actually shows where he's saying, I just want the name. There could be, 5,000 other fields, but just give me the name. That's all I want.
And by the way, Dang3K in Discord asks a wonderful question. What happens if you query friends inside of top-level friends? How deep will it nest before breaking? Haha, that's a great question. So this actually gets into a section I'm going to talk about in a second, about some of the pros and cons about GraphQL. You do, because you have this ability to nest, right, to nest objects within themselves, you could potentially end up, in certain cases, in an infinite loop scenario. Right. And there's where you have to like employ rate limiting and stuff to kind of protect yourself from that. But that's also ensuring you want to be very careful in your models. Now, scalar objects and that kind of deal, scalars like strings and ints, those are considered leaves. Right. So imagine your GraphQL schema is a big tree. Right. And any of the scalars are going to be leaves. Right. You know, to Kirsten's point from a moment ago, if I am referencing name and climate here of a planet, there's scalars. I can't go any further than this, right? I can't go any further than this at all. So at that point, that's going to stop. But to Dan3K's point, if I did have a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, I'm, depending on how I do this, I potentially will go until I run out of friends, right? Now, the good thing is something like friends, you will probably end somewhere, right? And you can control that. But that is something you definitely want to
but it is actually not, we don't store it that way, right? There's no way to say friend and then give me something from another table friend. You'll have something to make another query to get the information about that friend. So while I love graph databases that actually did that for you, smushed it all together, it's more challenging, and we're not there yet. So right now you get what's in that table. You'd get, if you went ahead and threw some friends at a lower level, you'd get them, and they could keep going. But it wouldn't go to another table to get that information for you.
Right. Now, Dutsubi, only read requests. No, you're not limited to just read requests. That is just how you do read requests, is use the query. There are mutations where you can, and you're going to experiment with that today as well. Yeah. So from a declarative standpoint, so we say that, queries in GraphQL are declarative, right? That means you can declare the fields that you're looking for. So we're saying in this example here that hero, we're declaring, okay, I want name field, height field, and mass field, essentially, is what we're saying.
What's cool about this is it's important to realize that where it says hero there, he could write anything. He could write my super cool query. That is basically when you make requests to GraphQL, you tell it you give it a name for the stuff you want back, and you can ask for 3 different bags of stuff with different names, and that word hero is just where you tell the GraphQL server where to put the answer to the question that you're asking.
Yeah, and Sunil, to specify a graph query keywords need to be specified. Yes, we're just about to go through and do examples of all of those. So you're gonna actually do some queries and mutations in here in a moment. We're almost done with this, and then we're gonna get back to the exercises. Okay, so mutation, right? This is now if I want to change resources, if I want to create a table or something like that, or if I want to add or update rows or items or whatever. This is where I'm gonna do it. It's in a mutation. Right, so mutation is the way that you change. This would be like your insert update kind of thing. And a query is the way that you read, right? That's pretty much what that comes down to. Now, just to kind of pin this up, right? So GraphQL is actually really awesome in a lot of ways. We're not trying to come here and say it's the only way you can do things, or it's it's oh my God, it's so much better in Rest and the only way you should ever do anything anymore. There are pros and cons, right? There are definitely a lot of pros though, for sure. Number one is the not number one, but on the top of that list, discoverability and introspection. One of the really, really awesome things you can do with GraphQL out of the box is, and you'll see this in the IDEs that we use, you can just discover all of the schema right out of the implemented GraphQL endpoint. You don't have to guess at what's in the payload or anything like that. And what's really cool is the IDEs, the GraphQL IDEs, almost all take advantage of this, where you go into like a schema section and you can just start going it down and you can just explore the schema. Right, so it's really nice, because what that means then is for whoever is implementing your GraphQL endpoint and that schema, then that itself is enough, and then who's ever consuming it can just automatically explore it. So that's pretty cool. As we talked about the declarative data fetching, you can essentially specify exactly what fields that you want. Schema stitching, so I can encapsulate multiple queries if I want into a single query and just use one network call to get that and pull the results back. From the flexible versioning standpoint, you can argue, by the way, we were talking about this one, you can argue, like you can actually do flexible versioning to some degree in REST as well with HTTP headers, more advanced use cases. There are ways to do it. Obviously, in REST, you have usually if you take if you have a big breaking change, maybe you'll make a V2 or a V3 of a particular REST endpoint. Here's the difference though. In something like REST, if you do that, if you're not using headers, then you have to change the endpoint in order to get the new update. In GraphQL, this is actually really neat. Let's pretend we use an example of using images, like a logo, right? And images over the last 10 years, maybe at one point we preferred in our website bitmaps, and then that migrated to SVGs, and then that migrated to PNGs, right? Well, with GraphQL, I can just, for each of those, let's say we start with a bitmap field. And then when SVGs became a thing, I just add a field. It doesn't change. It doesn't break any of the previous folks that were using the previous version of the API. They can just continue using the bitmap. You can just add fields on that way. That is one way to do that, right? But the key thing is you don't need to change the endpoint. And anybody who's not aware of the previous field, they don't need to be aware of it because they're using the new version, if you will. And then from the match standards, they use standards like JSON and HTTP, which is really nice. Now, some of the cons, right? GraphQL is limited to a single endpoint. Now, you can argue, this is another one you can argue a little bit. Is this better or not, right? Because a single endpoint does make things easier in one way. But from another standpoint, especially, from like a monitoring standpoint, if you have a single endpoint, like in REST, if you have different endpoints for all of your different sources and your services and stuff, well, you get kind of like, you can very easily see where all that traffic is going. In GraphQL, you have to instrument your backend yourself to do that same thing because it's just a single endpoint, right? So there are pros and cons to both. You could argue which one you want on that one. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, GraphQL is a little bit more complex. It's more complex in the query. It's more complex to set up your schema and stuff in the backend. However, I would argue that even like when I've written REST services in the backend in Java and stuff, you still have to think about that payload and what's going to go back. It's not like you stop thinking about it or something. It's just that GraphQL forces you to create a schema to do that, right? And it's strongly typed and everything. Obviously, the GraphQL language itself, it's not hard. It's just a little bit more complex to get started with, right? So, and not only that, like on the Java end, like if you're doing GraphQL and you're on like front end JavaScript code, you're golden, right? There's the Apollo client. There's all sorts of ways that you can get at that. On the Java end, consuming GraphQL is a little more challenging and such. So it's still young. It just needs time to grow. Then this ability to be able to perform all of these like nested queries and stuff is actually awesome for customers and consumers because they could do whatever they want. The challenge can be, though, is then on the N+1 select. Because what happens if you have a case where you have nested references, right? And now you have something that in GraphQL looks like it's one query, but just translated into 1,000 queries in your database, right? And that's what I was hinting at before when I mentioned this part about this rate limiting. These two are actually related, right? You really need to be careful and make sure you have some rate limiting in place because let's say you do have a terrible N+1 select issue that goes awry. You do not want to bring your service down from denial service because it's, you've got an infinite loop or something like that. So there's a little bit more you need to think about from that standpoint. But again, it's pros and cons. It's never one thing is perfect, right? The last thing here on this list is caching. Caching is harder, and mostly it's because of the declarative data fetching, right? It's harder to cache something when you don't know, exactly if in one query you have one field that you have declared, and let's say in another query you also declare that field, but dependent on the data set that goes with and such, you may or may not want to cache that data in that second query. How do you do that, right? Now, the cool thing, though, this is where Apollo, if you've not done anything with GraphQL in front end, totally check out Apollo. Apollo is a whole separate project from us and everything. This is what Netflix uses as well. There's a bunch of others. Apollo is a wonderful GraphQL client, and they actually have a caching layer in there that helps try to solve a lot of this kind of stuff. So there's
other options for caching too. If you use a CDN, I know Akamai is big and expensive, but they do actually graph. cache GraphQL for their very, very large
Oh, cool.
customers. So so they have been working on that. They're not the biggest open source people, so but I'm betting that is something that is out there somewhere as well.
Yeah. And Adventure House is asking, what is rate limiting? It just essentially limiting the amount of operations you allow to just protect against cases where if you have like runaway nested queries or like infinite loops or something like that, that you don't all of a sudden completely inundate your backend with a million calls or something like that. So that's what that means. Hopefully that made sense, Adventure House.
And that's one of the reasons that you might have multiple tokens. You might have an application layer token that doesn't have the same permissions.
That's a good point. Yeah.
You can change how your application behaves with rate limiting based on the token that's being used. So you don't get rate limited, but the people who are using that token you specifically made for that application, they can get rate limited.
Right. And Naveen asks, does DGS use Apollo? I believe they do. And as a matter of fact, in the DGS tutorial that I've linked in the repo, they do in fact suggest to use Apollo. So they actually, and then the Apollo stuff will work. You can follow it right along and do that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then the last couple ones here. So backend for front end, what this is really about, and this is actually, these are kind of key points about it. Backend for front end. So imagine I have a service out there, but I have a mobile client, and then I also have my desktop client. The requirements for those might be different, right? But what's cool about GraphQL is I can be very specific about, for the mobile client, don't serve up the big images or don't serve up the big videos or whatever it is. And the desktop client, I've got, more things that I want to expose there just because of the different mediums. And GraphQL actually makes it very, very easy to kind of define those for both. As we talked about from the aggregation piece, the fact that you can actually aggregate your services in a query, you can do joins and such, offers up some really, really cool capabilities. And especially when bandwidth matters, GraphQL shines, right? Because of the fact that you can very, very clearly, be explicit in exactly the fields that you return back, then you can control the size of your payload. That's pretty much what that comes down to. Okay, so let me stop talking. Yeah, go ahead.
Rajiv has a specific question for you in Discord. I think it's probably best to do in voice. It's also doing GraphQL themes.
Okay. Fields of lots of children in this route can help, but REST will be handling away at having different endpoints.
I mean, that basically what he's asking is one of the things GraphQL is great about. If you have a lot of things that are related to that main resource, and in REST you have to request all those resources. It's a very chatty thing. So just like whenever you're setting up a Cassandra database, if you organize your data so that they can make one query and get all the things they want instead of having to make 12 queries to get all the things, then that's better. But it's on you to put your data in a way that they can get it, and it's on them to understand how to get it.
Okay, so with all that, that's enough talking for a minute, right? We've done a lot of talking. Let's do some things, right? Hopefully at this point, and I will now zoom in. I did not forget, Kirsten. It's always funny having to zoom in on this, though, because it ends up taking up like all the screen real estate and everything like that. Okay, hopefully you are seeing something that looks similar to this, right? Now, another thing that will happen when you launched Gitpod and the IDE, and matter of fact, I noticed when I navigated away, I think it asked me and I wasn't there. It should have launched the graphical tab for you. If it did not do that, here's what you do. In the very lower right-hand corner, notice this ports, right? Click on ports, go to 8080. This is only if it didn't launch the graphical tab. And then click on the world icon. That will then launch that into another tab, and you should see this simple Go graphical example, right? This is going to be the IDE, one of the IDEs we're going to play with. So hopefully you are seeing both the IDE with the Java side. So the Java app, by the way, was automatically loaded for you. With Spring Boot and stuff, it was automatically loaded. So the endpoint is actually already running. Then the NPM part did a bunch of installs, but we're not running it yet. We haven't done that. But now we have this simple graphical example. So hopefully you're there with me. Okay. By the way, this graphical is embedded in the DGS framework. That was so cool. So they just provided it as part of the framework. So that way you automatically have a tool that you can start to use with the GraphQL endpoint that you create with DGS. Okay. All right, so hopefully you're here with me. So what we want to do now is we're going to go to step 4, experiment with graphical. Now,
how did you open?
I'll do it again.
Get GraphQL. Somebody's asking.
So if for some reason your graphical tab didn't just automatically open, this is what you want to do. Down in the lower right-hand corner, you should see in your Git pod a ports, right? Ports 8080 in particular, because that's the one we opened. I click on that. It brings me up to ports here. Then you see, okay, 8080 is green because we exposed that with our Java app. That's what's happened. Our Java app started up and it opened port 8080 waiting for communication for a GraphQL endpoint. All I had to do, there's a little world icon right here.
But you still don't have graphical, which is what they're asking about.
That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. Yeah, so this little world icon next to 8080 will open the browser. That will launch a new tab like mine did here. That'll launch up graphical, and you should see my endpoint. This is my Git pod endpoint where Java's running in graphical. All right. And it shows it's too dark.
But he's probably not talking about this one.
Oh, maybe.
But it probably you need to zoom, I think.
Yeah, I'll zoom here. Yeah, I can only zoom in here so much. I've already zoomed in.
I know.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right, so you really want to just get to the spot is where we want to get to. Now, in this next section with this, I just want to point out that you'll see I'm going to open this file here. There's nothing, this isn't for you to copy or anything. This is just the schema, right? So here's what I'm going to do. And this is also detailed in the instruction here. But I just want to take a look at the schema we've implemented on the Java backend, right? So this is, again, using the Netflix DGS framework. So I'm going to open this up and go to my schema GraphQL. You see this? Let me blow this up a little bit. Hopefully it's not too crazy. All right. Oh, that's too far. Too far. I'll just put it back. And you'll notice that this is the same as here, right? Now, what we're doing here in this schema, this is actually going to tell our code, here are the types that we want to expose. Okay, I'm going to have a show. So this is like in a movie. This is based on the Netflix app, right? So I want to have a query type called shows. I want genres, right? So I'm saying I want to expose to my front end or whoever is going to consume these 2 queries that they could do, either shows or genres. Notice as well that we're telling it, okay, what types those belong to. And here I'm defining a show type and a genre type, and then my fields, right? So these are very simple. That's on purpose, right? So I'm saying a show can have a title or a release year, and I typed something in there by accident, get that out of there. And a genre can have a value, right? And that's it. So
hey, David.
Yep.
If you have multiple queries, you can't feed one of your queries into the other query, right? You would have to do that on the client side, correct?
Not that when you say
so
feed one, you mean get the results.
You do a multiple query, right? And in the top one you get name, and then you can't pass that name to the second query. I think you'd need to actually do a second query.
Yeah, I would think you would need to like store that into a variable and then pass that to another one. I don't believe you can do that, but I'm not going to say 100%. I have not experimented with that myself, but I've not come across it. So I don't 100% know on that one. Yeah. Okay, so like I said, so we're defining, this is our schema. This is what the Java implementation is going to use. And this is what we're saying we're going to expose to our consumers, to our front end. So this is the back end piece, right, where we define this. So we're saying, I'm going to expose these 2 queries. And for the types that they belong to, here are the fields that they are allowed to use. Now let's see what happens if we now look at some of our examples, right? So if you scroll down a little bit here, and you'll see this query here, I'm just going to copy that. I'll go to graphical. I'm just going to paste it right in here, okay? And then there's a play button up top. And then I play it. Now check this out. I said, okay, I want a query, right? So I'm going to read something. I'm giving it a name. That's all this is. It could be any arbitrary name. And then I'm querying against shows, and I want the title field. Now what happens? Now, mind you, that has to match. I'll just pull this out so we can see a little easier. Okay. If that has to match my schema, that has to match what the GraphQL implementation in the back end is. So notice it shows genres, or in this case, I'm using title. What happens if I do something wrong, right? I'm going to get a validation error, right? So this is something cool about GraphQL is it's got a validation layer in there. It's going to let you know if you have done something wrong, right? So it will not allow you to try to query outside of what has been defined in the schema, right? So now if we take another example, I'm just building it up, right? So notice now in this case, it's not just title anymore. I want to say with release year. By the way, in a lot of these GraphQL IDEs, something really cool happens when you name your queries. Notice what happened here, just title and with release year. Those are those arbitrary names I put. Most of the IDEs I've played with do that exact thing, right? So it's actually really good. Plus, this is good to do in your code. It's descriptive. It tells you exactly what the query is for. Obviously, these aren't as descriptive as I'd probably put in code, but I think you get the point, right? So it's actually kind of a nice little feature there. Now, the difference, though...
I mean, you can do the multiple queries. You can ask for 5 or 6 different things with a single query, and that's going to save you that bandwidth. Hey,
yes.
David, we have a lot of people asking about the exclamation points after string and the definition of the types. Could you
totally.
Just cover that real quick?
I totally glossed over that. Yes, this means it is required, right? It's saying it's required. So it is saying that it is a required field, especially when you go to update and everything, and just letting you know what, we don't, this is such a simple example. I didn't do a lot with like IDs or anything like that, but that's all it means. Okay. So the example,
I bet you could zoom that a little bit.
What part?
Where you are, where your cursor is right now. Sorry, over to the dark stuff.
Oh, you mean this? Yeah. Unfortunately, when I zoom this too much, by the way, this is the same exact thing that is here in the repo. As well.
Mondo 192 there run in parallel.
What's that?
Multiple queries in the same request are run in parallel.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, so here, what I really want to point out here is just notice that these two, the only difference really between them, other than the name I gave it, was one is querying against shows with just the title field, the other one as release year. This is that declarative part, right? This is that flexibility standpoint. So notice that if I say just title, my payload is different compared to if I had title and release year, right? So I get more in the payload in this case, but that's that control that we're talking about. Now, here's an example, if we go down a little bit, where we can actually filter. Now, can I just add a filter to any query? No, that has to be defined, right? We defined it in our schema. So again, as the data owner, as the person implementing the back end, right, you would define this. You would say, hey, I want a filter where they can, in fact, filter on a title. So in this case, I want to say, okay, in my data set, right, I just want to get that one show, right? So this is, again, kind of just stepping up some of the things you can do. But the key thing here is that notice that everything that I do, everything that I define, that is what I'm limited to in my queries. I can't just kind of query outside of that. Yeah, what's up, Kristen?
There's actually some really good ideas right now around the date. Could you get all the shows like after 2015, or could you order them by year? And
yes.
I thought those were, and some of this, one of the things about GraphQL is sometimes you're going to need to do things on the client side, but it does give you some stuff for free. So I just wondered if you could grab those, because I thought they were good questions.
Yeah, absolutely. No, like order by date and stuff like that. You can totally do that, right? One thing I need to say from that standpoint, GraphQL is extremely expressive. It is a very, very expressive language. There is a ton you can do with it. As a matter of fact, one of the resources that I put here in the repo, you should all check out, right? The graphql.org. Start there, right? That is going to spell out all of, I mean, we're only scratching the surface here today, right? For what we're doing here, we're scratching the surface. There is so much more you can do with that. But yes, you can do order bys and things like that. Yeah, it's a very, very expressive language. All right, so now on to the next example here. This one. So this is an example of now aggregating two queries. Notice all I'm doing, I'm not joining them. All I'm doing in this particular case is in a single query, pulling the results from both, right? I'm getting shows and genres, right? I don't need to access different endpoints for these different services. I can literally just aggregate them right in the same query. So, you know, the whole goal of this is just to kind of show you some of the ways that you can start to build on, you know, what you're doing and how you can use that to optimize things. One other thing I want to show you here in graphical is the docs. Remember I mentioned earlier that GraphQL, one of the really cool features is introspection, right? So you can use a lot of the IDEs to start to kind of explore your query and see what can you do, right? What is a show? Oh, a show has title and release year. Oh, okay. So if I wasn't exposed to this on the back end, which you're probably not going to be as a front end consumer or something like that, then I can still, in a lot of, like I said, any of the IDEs I've used do this, where they allow you to explore what the schema is right off the bat, right? So the fact that you have that in there is actually kind of really nice. And this is the way that I would start. I would start building my GraphQL queries like this. And then once I have my queries and I got it worked out, now I can put them in my code. Right, now I can start figuring that part out. Okay, so if you have gotten to a point, I want to move on to step 5, just to make sure we have time to get through it. If you've gotten here and you did the graphical stuff, give us the thumbs up. Let us know that you're doing it. Manish, yes, we've not updated the token in our application to get access. Great question. And I kind of maybe glossed over something here. So let me step back for a moment and explain something. So as part of this, and here I'll cheat and show you under the hood a little bit. So as part of this whole Gitpod setup, there's a lot going on here, but here's what I want to point out. Notice there is both a backend and a client example. So what we've done here is we've instrumented a simple Java backend. As a matter of fact, I'll go ahead and show this to you because I'm glad you said something because I kind of forgot to mention this to you all. So there is a simple Java backend right here that essentially uses that same, this is the schema, the GraphQL schema we're using, and this is the implementation. Now, in this case, I'm not hooked up to any data service. We're not talking to a database yet. It's literally hard-coded right here in the Java code, right? But it conforms to that schema. So funny enough, from a consumer standpoint, you would have no idea that this was all hard-coded or on a database or not, or, you know, something like that. The point of this, again, was because we're kind of just showing both what the simple backend might look like, and then what the front end looks like, and then we're going to hook it up. So in a minute, pretty soon, we're going to hook it up to the backend. By the way, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up come through. Thank you. One thing I do want to point out, this is probably the simplest DGS framework setup you can have. Notice these annotations here: DGS component, DGS query. The component is where I'm going to get my data from. The query is, you know, that's the thing that's handling the query that comes in, right? So matter of fact, if you noticed when I'm logging here, and you should see it, even though, yeah, right there. You see query executed, genres, value. So if I come back over to my graphical example, and I do just title, watch, you'll see this move, boop, right? So it says shows title is Stranger Things, right? So this is the part that's actually responsible for handling the query when it comes in. And that's where I'm just, doing some simple logging. But this is enough right here. This is actually the basic. Now, it can get a lot more complex than this for sure. But this is the basic thing. By the way, for those of you who are our Java developers who might be looking to do something like this on the back end, in the repo, if I scroll up a little bit, here, right here, this Netflix DGS framework tutorial, right? That's your friend. Go there. Start that. That will essentially show you how to build all this with Spring Initializer and everything. It's a really awesome tutorial. It's what Netflix uses, which is really cool. Netflix is really out there, out in front. They release all sorts of stuff that folks can use all the time, and this is one of them. Yeah, hey, Manny, go ahead, Kirsten.
AJ, we do actually, we're just about to put out an Astro.js GraphQL library for Node.js. So, so you'll have that available.
Yes, and we're just about to do the Node.js part as well. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Mani in Discord, can we see the schema of the underlying tables, especially the key columns? Well, funny enough, the schema is literally this. This is the schema we are using for this right now that is only implemented on the Java backend. In a moment, when we move over to Astro and we hook that up, then you're going to see that schema. So something I want to clarify here. we actually have two different data sources. We have the Java backend that is right in front of us, and then we have Astra with GraphQL that we're going to hook up here in a moment, right? Those are actually two different backends. Now, for those of you who are veterans, because we did see that we had some GraphQL masters, then, you know, if you're hooking up to different endpoints, now you start to get into a whole different world, like, you know, federations and stuff. We're not doing any of that today. It's way out of scope. But you can do that with GraphQL. It's actually something else. You can hook up disparate sources and such. But yeah, we're not doing that. But this is the actual schema. This is the schema that we are reading from and that we are using from the Java backend. All right, so when I had asked before about thumbs up, I did see a bunch of thumbs up come in. Awesome. So I want to move on to step 5 here and now get into the React fun. So I'm going to go now. All of you should have 2 terminals because that should have automatically launched for you. The left one would be your Java one. The right one will be your React one. Notice the directory should also be in GraphQL client examples. So you want to work out of the right one here. And the first thing we want to do is we're going to install Netlify. You might be wondering, why exactly are we installing Netlify? What does that have to do with anything? So on the React.js front end piece, I kind of cheated. Not really. This is actually a practice that we would usually normally use. But like, since we are talking to the Astra backend and a real database and stuff like that, I had originally started out doing this stuff where I just put everything in index.js, and I wanted to make it easy so you could like read everything in a single page. But then I had a bad taste in my mouth, and I was like, that's not the real way I would implement something like this. So I ended up going the route of using serverless functions to implement the calls to my GraphQL endpoint. So it increases the complexity a little bit, but that's why we're using Netlify. It's the only reason why we're doing that. Funny enough, for those of you familiar with Netlify, then you could use this to then deploy to Netlify, but we're not doing that. So do the npm install. Like I just did, it'll download a bunch of stuff. It just takes a moment. Then we want to go ahead and do a Netlify dev. This is going to run the environment. There we go. It's going to spin up our React.js app. Oh, Tashar, the data flow in this particular case is actually the AstraDB part and the Java part are separate. Consider them 2 different data sources. They are each their own GraphQL endpoint. The Java is one. AstraDB has its own. They are totally separate. So it's not flowing from one to another. Yeah, so Saranjan, is there a possibility that Con Netflix GraphQL will become like Org Spring Framework? Who knows? I don't know on that one. Yeah, I don't know on that one. Maybe. It's a really cool, it's a really nice framework. They did a really awesome job, I think. All right, so once you spin up Netlify dev, you should see something like this, right? Now, it is normal at this point that, and this is going to that question that I just saw a second ago about, is it Java or AstraDB or something like that? The local is going to the Java backend, okay? Where the AstraDB ones we have not hooked up. So they're actually sitting as loading right now. And that's how it should look. But also I want to point out that notice the data in shows, right? If we come back over, when we looked at shows, these should match, right? This is the exact data. Going back to, I put it away. So remember in our Java backend, we hard-coded the data, right? So this data here is exactly the data I'm seeing here. All right, so I'm just consuming this same thing. I'm executing the same query, same exact, or actually this query. I'm executing this query in my front-end code, right? So that's the data I should see is exactly what this is. And I want to make sure you see that one-to-one, right? So this thing, the React piece is just over GraphQL. It is performing that query to get this data. All right. Okay, so now if we take a look at some of the React.js JavaScript files. So I'm going to go into client examples. You'll see I give the exact spot you need to go to, client examples functions, right? In particular, get shows backend and get genres backend. So if we go to get shows backend, put this over here too. All right, here's what I want to point out. Notice this query. This is it, right? The rest of the stuff is just essentially making the fetch to our endpoint, to our GraphQL endpoint. But at its core, this is it. I can literally just take that same query and then I can execute it and return that result, and that's what we're returning here. There is some more as far as like injecting this into our state and everything like that with React. That's actually happening in our components down here. Where are my components? Oops, here we go. Here we go. So I have a shows component. Need to put this over here. There we go. Right, so you see I'm calling this get shows backend. That is calling the backend that performs the query. I'm not going to go a lot into the React details and how that works, but what's really happening here is we're actually just setting state. We're setting a GQL, what the result of our GraphQL query. So that's this query, the one we were just playing with in graphical. So I'm going to use a state GQL result to asynchronously fetch that. Once it returns, I'll set the state, and then that is the part that is responsible for injecting that directly down into our DOM with React. So if you're not familiar with it, this is when people are asking, hey, do I need to have any prerequisite knowledge? This is the part that I was talking about. Like, it's better if you know React. If you don't, that's okay. Go to that other workshop that we have. But, hopefully the comments in here will really kind of like spell that out for you. But essentially, we set the state when the asynchronous fetch to the GraphQL query comes back. Then you can just access. Here's my result. Now I can actually just access the path to these. And what's really cool too, if you take a look, I'm going to move over my screen here real fast and go to, let's see, that one.
When you get a chance, could you check out Bill Zombie in Discord? I think something's up.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, give me a second. I'll finish the statement and then let me take a look, okay? Yeah. So here's one last little thing I just want to show you is when I make the call to the GraphQL, from the, to the serverless function that's actually making that call to GraphQL and executing that query, here's the payload that comes back, right? It's a JSON object, right? So notice then in my code, that's exactly what I'm accessing, right? And so these fields will match exactly what that GraphQL query definition is, right? So across the whole end to end, whatever I set that schema up, that's exactly what I will get as my payload in my result. All right, let's see. I'm looking at some questions now. Oh yeah, Nirdesh, yes, there is another workshop for the React part of it. I have in fact dropped it into the repo as well, but let me pull that one for you and drop it real fast. I think I actually put it right up here. Oh yeah, here it is. I did. I put it in the very top, but here it is. Here. So for those of you who are not familiar with React and you're wondering, oh, thank you, someone beat me to it. Ryan beat me to it. Thank you. Yeah, if you're not familiar with that, then Ryan is dropping the React part so you can kind of learn there what's going on from that standpoint. All right, let's see. How are we doing on other questions? And I see Gamer said, let's see. So basically, we could actually use the existing backend code written for different existing REST endpoints and set up GQL schemas using existing services. I don't see why not. Yeah, I don't see why not at all, Gamer. Okay.
So, Bill Zombie, if you scroll up a little bit,
I see it.
Yeah, I'm just not sure.
The browser popped up after running those commands. I would say that my question for you, Bill is, I don't know how well you can see this down here, but are you in the terminal for the GraphQL client examples? That's where you want to be. And I happen to notice that there's double quotes in what you pasted there. So just to ensure, there should be no quotes at all around any of this, right? Notice that it's just literal right there. Yeah, but the key thing is make sure that you're in the GraphQL client examples directory. It should have already been there for you, but you want to make sure that's where you're at. Okay, all right, so let's see. So this next section is really the part that's talking about the React piece. I'll let you kind of digest that on your own. But again, the key thing that I want to show here is that here we're just fetching against our query. By the way, notice in this case, this is a simple fetch. I'm not doing anything more complex. Now, this is a place where you could use Apollo Client. And again, in the repo, there is an Apollo client that's there. There's a whole tutorial and everything you can go through. It's what Netflix and others use. It's actually really awesome. Apollo client's really cool. The only reason I actually started using it and then I decided not to, just because of the way that I was mapping out this app, and I didn't like a couple things, so I just decided to do it with a simple fetch, right? But this is as simple as it gets. I'm going to use fetch. I have some URL, which is, by the way, my GraphQL endpoint. That in this particular case, if you're on Gitpod, you get an endpoint. If this was local, this would be like localhost 8080 GraphQL or something like that. That would actually look just like this. This is the Java app, right? This is the Java app in my localhost. It exposes it 8080 and it's at GraphQL. That's what I would put in my .env in order to do that. But because we're in GitHub or a Gitpod with this, it generates a more interesting endpoint. So with the scripting that's in Gitpod, I kind of pre-did this for you. But notice here, that should match your Gitpod endpoint. As a matter of fact, if I went to this, then that'll give me the same thing saying, hey, there's no body in this thing. But then that's where this comes into play. So this graphical IDE is actually talking to this endpoint, right? So they're just talking right to each other. All right, so let's see. So what I'd like to do now is, in lieu of time, because we've got about 10 minutes to do this last part. Oh, I do have, yes, Orlando, I have 2 dogs here. Yes. Oh, yeah, V. Chandra, does GraphQL support paging? Totally, yes. Interestingly enough, I don't explore that here, but in our follow-on in the Netflix clone workshop, we do explore paging in that one. And that link is at the very, very top of this. So if you do want to explore that, then paging is there, yes. Yes, all right, let's see.
I don't know why Netlify Dev isn't working for Pankaj. It's odd.
I mean, in a worst-case scenario, in a worst case, you could always just launch another Gitpod, but yes, that is interesting. And if you really need to, you could always go to the Gitpod YAML. All the commands are there. But the key thing is just to make sure that you're in the right directory. You've got to be in that GraphQL client examples. If you do it outside of that, it's not going to work right. All right, so moving on then to the fun with hooking up. We want to hook up the data layer. Okay, so we've got the React app that is talking to the Java backend, right? And its schema, and that's what we're seeing here. But now we want to go one step further, and we want to hook this up to our Java backend, or I'm sorry, our Astra backend, our database.
So before we do that, could you just quickly go over the part where it's calling the Java, the code in React? We have a question on, how is it actually calling GraphQL from the React app? So if you look at the React code before you add the new stuff, that'd be great.
So what we've done here, if you take a look at one of the examples, by the way, this is also, if you go back and do this, like and like go through the workshop, like the text, this is also explained there as well. But you notice in this get shows backend, right? This is doing a simple fetch off a URL, which is our GraphQL endpoint, and in the body of that fetch is our query. Notice this query matches the same queries that we were working with when we were working with the IDE here, right? That matches that. So here's the query. That is literally the same thing, other than the name that I gave. So this fetch then, when we call this, right? And this is called when, in this case, shows is calling it right here, okay? So I'm calling the serverless function that is responsible for doing the fetch, the GraphQL query you just saw, right? Here is the React part. Then I'm doing an asynchronous, right? We're getting an asynchronous call to this backend, wait for the result. It sets the state of my GQL result. And then that is what is being injected down into my DOM. So when that state changes and it is updated with something, then we get all of the values that we can just inject into our DOM. So hopefully that answers that question. All right. So going on to step 6 here. So we want to go back over to Astra. Now here's where we're going to hook up to Astra. We created the database earlier, right? And now we want to hook up our app to that. So I'm going to click, if you notice, when I go to the dashboard, I'm going to click on the database. I'm going to click on the database that we created. Which is, I have too many of these. There. So I'm going to click on the database I created. You're going to get to a detail view. You want to go to connect. In there, go to GraphQL API. Here, you will actually be given the endpoint, right? Now, the first thing I want you to do is you're going to go to now the GraphQL Playground, right? This link that says launching GraphQL Playground. This is your own endpoint, by the way. So you can't share this or anything. This is for your database. So you're going to open that up. Again, I'm going to middle click or right click and say open link in new tab. That's going to open up the playground. And you will see this playground. Now, this is directly linked to your Astra database. Now, here's something really important about this. At the very, very bottom down here, you'll see these HTTP headers. You need to put your token in here. Remember I said hold on to that token? That's why I said that. So I'm going to come back and get my token, the one that says Astra CS. I'm going to grab this. I just use that copy widget. I'm going to populate this. Whoops, wrong button. Populate this section, right? And oh, look at that. Now it's going to let me authenticate. So the first thing I want to do here is now we're going to create some new tables. We're going to do this with a mutation, right? So remember I said queries are read-only for how I'm getting data. Mutations are the way that you're going to create something or you're going to change something or add something, right? So I'm going to use this mutation. I will put this then, overwriting anything that's in there, in my GraphQL schema tab. That's the one I want, that first one that was opened with my token. If I then say play, I'm now going to create this table called reference list. And here, let me blow this up a little bit because I know I'm going to need to do that. There we go. All right. So when I get this response, it's telling me it created the table. I now have a table called reference list. This is from the Netflix clone app. Now, once I've got this, great, I have a table, but I want to do a little bit more. I want to insert some data into that table. So let's use some more mutations. But here's something key. Notice I'm in the GraphQL schema tab for this. That is for schema changes. But when I want to do things outside of that, I want to like request data, or if I want to add rows or something, I want to go to the GraphQL tab. And when I do this, I need to come back down to my headers and populate that token again. So I'm going to go grab my token, put that in. Now, there's one other thing I need to do. And by the way, this is all explained. This is all here in step 7 when it says inserted. It tells you here. This, unfortunately, I'll admit, this is a little hard to notice. But the endpoint, this endpoint's important. So what I want to do, there's 2 ways you can get the endpoint. One, it's actually sitting right here, right? That's one way to get it. Another way, though, is you can just update the system to the key space that we used, right? So this is the key space. This Netflix key space is the key space we created earlier in our database. And a moment ago, notice our key space name is also Netflix key space. So when we created this new table, we're creating it in the Netflix key space. And our endpoint is also going to be that Netflix key space. So now I want to take all these mutations. These are all my inserts, right? I'm going to put some data now into that table. So I'm going to copy this from step 7C. I'm going to paste this in. I'll hit play. And, oh, what happened there? Did I fat finger something? I may have fat fingered something. Oh, I did. Aha. No, okay, this was actually a neat example. I'm glad that just happened. So notice what GraphQL did, right? It's actually got an error object that will get returned if something goes wrong or something like that. In this case, it was an authentication. I actually messed that up. So let me try that again. Let's see. I must have fat fingered something. Let me grab that again. Let's try that. Oh, I see what I did. All right. Probably not. I see what I did. Aha. Tried that. There we go. Cool. I fat fingered my own stuff. All right, cool. Okay. All right, so now in this case, you see, let me back that out a little bit. So I use mutations to do all of my inserts, and now I inserted a bunch of data into the reference list table. Yeah, I've blown it up as much as I can. Unfortunately, always limited on screen real estate from that standpoint. All of the mutations and everything, Gabino and stuff, they're here in the repo, right? So step 7C, step 6C, that's where all the mutations are. They're right here in the repo. Now, finally, once I've inserted the data into my table, I can perform a query. By the way, I can just leave that mutation, all these in here, and I can just put this, I can just append this into the end. Because they're named, now the playground will let me choose which ones, but now I can go ahead and select them. So I'm going to select them, and now I see I have data here. Yeah, if you're unable to authenticate, Mekla, just make sure, like what you saw what I did, make sure 1, that you have your token filled out, and make sure 2, which is what I did, I fat-fingered the end of it by accident, and I had by accident carriage returned that down to the next line. So make sure that you just have that single line and that your token is in fact surrounded by quotes, because that's exactly what I had done, and that's why it didn't work. But you should just be able to use that token. Make sure with your token that you are using the one that says *CS, the token. That's the one that you want, *CS. Okay. Let's see. Oh, Pato, the reason why we got the error is, well, it depends on the error you're talking about. But the reason why we got that error, at least because of my case, is because I fat-fingered my token. That's what I did. All right. Okay, so now here's the thing. We've now set up a table, a reference list table. We added data, and we saw that we have the data there, right? But now let's go ahead and do the finishing part that hooks this up to Astra and our app, right? So I'm going to come back over to my app. Now, I already had mine killed, but if yours was running, I'd want to do a Control-C. I want to kill the app, and the app is the React app, right? So if I try to run this, it's not going to do anything because I've killed it. Now I want to run this command, this Astra setup. This is a convenience, it's a convenience method. What it's going to do is it's actually going to use my key. So I'm going to take that same Astra token we've been working with. I'm going to paste that in here, okay? And this is kind of it's a nice little helper method. Remember before I showed you my .env file and it had just a Java GraphQL endpoint? Well, Astra setup went and it used that token and it said, hey, I'm going to find your database and stuff based off of the parameters I just passed in right here. Notice my database and my key space name. That's what we created. And it takes all the values I need to authenticate, including my GraphQL endpoint right here, and it injects them into my .env file. It's really nice. So it's an awesome little tool that you can use it's a nice little helper. Now, if I go back and I start my app again, Netlify dev, we'll see that it injected all of my environment variables. It's going to start up. And now when it runs, I should see that reference list, remember reference list is the one that we just created, has all of the data that we just created. And if I take a look at the playground, notice I have things like anime and award-winning and stuff like that. If I go back to my app, I have anime, award-winning, right? This is performing the same query that we see right here in my code. And then, again, just like we did the Java backend. The only difference really is that we are talking to the Astra database backend instead of Java in this case. All right. Now, if you've actually gotten here,
what is it you wanted to do again, Anchor?
Yeah. Let us know what you're referring to, that Encore.
Yeah.
And we can do that. Yes, and Rahul, you read my mind. If you got to this point, give us a thumbs up. Oh, the error. Yeah. So I'm glad you saw that. Who was that? Ajay, yes. This is on purpose. Matter of fact, this is part of the homework, right? So the rest of this is actually here, part of the homework. I'm going to leave that to the homework. I want to give you a little hint, though. This is actually part of how, and I'll actually show you real fast. Yeah. So if I try to perform a query that, say, doesn't have a table or doesn't have data or something like that, then the validation layer in GraphQL is going to bubble that up to the errors object. right? And it's going to tell you exactly what it is. So in what I've done is, remember, I only created one, the reference list table. I did not actually create a shows by name table yet, right? That is actually coming up. So I wanted to illustrate that because I thought it was important, because GraphQL does a really nice job on the validation end and on the error end of bubbling that kind of stuff up, right? So if you do something wrong, if you're trying to do something outside of the schema or something doesn't, it's going to tell you, right? It's going to tell you in a very explicit object. And the code for that too, to handle that error case, at least a simple version of that code is in this. By the way, the Apollo client does a really nice job with errors. They just handle that for you. They actually have like a little errors object that automatically handles that for you. It's really, really sweet. So I really suggest taking a look at it. Okay. All right, let's see. Yes, exactly. Vemshi, the validation error. Yes, so if you're getting a validation error, it tells me, oh, is that what you're answering, Kirsten? Yes, you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you already got it. All right, so the rest, by the way, the rest of what you do about that error is part of the homework. That was very astute observation, Ajay. I did see a bunch of thumbs up of folks who actually got here, but now it is time for us to move over to our swag quiz so we can get some swag going and end on time and do all that fun. So let's go over to our swag quiz. Let's get some fun stuff going. All right, so if Menti lets me move on. Yes, Savi, yeah, you can connect to SQL or NoSQL databases, right?
Well, but you still have to have GraphQL engine in the middle, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not natural. It's not something that all databases do, right? We don't.
That's right.
Not even doing it. We're
that's right. Yeah,
Stargate.
that's where Stargate comes into play. Exactly. So to that point, to Kirsten's point, in that simple Java backend we have, I would hook that up to the database, right? I would hook that up as the backend code provider and the person providing the GraphQL endpoint. I would hook that up to my data source, and then that would be the part that maps to that database. It could be any database that you could talk to with code, but it's not. There are some databases out there that do have GraphQL that work with them, like what you're seeing with Stargate and Astra and stuff like that allows it. There are others that do something like that, but she's right. Yeah, you've got to have some. That's that middle layer, right? So you do have something that is connecting to the backend database along with your GraphQL schema. And then that's what allows you to consume it. Okay, so I'll give you all a moment to get your names in. Yeah, Manny, definitely put in some screenshots, please. Alrighty, I'll give everyone another moment. We got a good amount of folks in the Menti. Awesome. All right, so key thing about the Menti when you're doing the Menti, look at your phones. There could be lag in the feed, and speed in answering matters. So look at your phones. Are we ready? Cake. I like that, Sean. Cake. All right, first one. GraphQL is a query language, a server-side runtime, a query language and server-side runtime, something you plot data on. All right, let's see what happened here. Oh, that was tricky. It is both a query language and a server-side runtime, right? So it's both. You can do both. That was tricky right out of the gate, but that's why we create these questions for that. All right, so let's see what happened in our leaderboard.
That was kind of mean, David.
All right, so Pankaj is in the top of the fastest time. Ajay, hello! Number 2, and that looks like Arturo, number 3. And all right, let's see what happens in the next question. I may have been mean in this one. We'll find out. I'm sorry. So sorry. All right, question 2. Are we ready? Let's do it. GraphQL is strongly typed. No. It depends. Yes. Only if it takes protein powder. can't hear the music, Kirsten, but I can.
No.
Gotta dance over here.
My typing is not going in. Depends.
All right, let's see what happened to our leaderboard. Yes, it's strongly typed. Woo! Yes, it is. It depends was me being mean. I did that to throw everybody off, but yes, it is strongly typed. It is absolutely strongly typed. Unfortunately, nobody grabbed the protein powder joke. Of course, they probably want to win the swag quiz and not just throw it. So, all right, let's see what our leaderboard looks like now. Oh, look at that. So there's this fight between Ajay and Pankaj there at the top, and Arturo holds the third spot. Let's see what happens in our next question. All right, 3 of 5. Dun, 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 dun. What is a main feature of GraphQL? Declarative queries, has lots of X's and Y's, decreased network load, multiple endpoints.
By the way, I want to say that all these guys are asking fantastic questions. This is going to make it, this is our first time running this, and we're learning a lot about, how we can make it even better. So thank you so much.
Yes.
We appreciate the questions and the interaction.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And, we'll, if any of you two, this is best on Discord, but especially for it could be anybody, but especially for our GraphQL masters and that kind of deal. Or for those of you who are first learning about it, if you feel like there are things that you're like, I could have known more about this, or you could have explained more about this, please give us feedback in the Discord. Let us know. Yeah, let us know. All right, so this one, where I was maybe tricky in the beginning, I think I made it nicer here because you actually had 2 answers that could have been right. Declarative queries and or decreased network load are both correct in this case. From the multiple endpoints standpoint, really a main feature is actually the single endpoint. You could argue, if you're talking federations, I hope that weren't my veterans who did that and answered those. You could argue, well, wait a minute, you could have multiple endpoints. The key thing here, though, is the main feature is really that single endpoint. No matter how you say aggregate queries and such like that, right? So maybe that one was a little too tricky too, especially for those who are familiar with Federation. I just may have thrown you off. Sorry about that. All right, let's see what our leaderboard looks like.
And I will, I'm going to do a quick shout out. We do have a workshop feedback channel in Discord that you can jump into and give us any feedback that you have about the workshop. And if you give us some really good feedback, there's a possibility swag might happen. So
good point.
We really appreciate letting us know how it could be better or what you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very good point. So Pankaj takes the lead again with the fastest time to lock, jumps up to second place. Arturo is just holding third place. Like, nobody can get Arturo off of third place. So very good, Arturo, for staying the course there.
One more. You gotta do it.
All right, let's see. Now, it's still, I know, Ajay, you got knocked out, but you're still there. You're in the running. It's anyone's game still. All right, question 4 or 5. Let's see what happens. What is AstroDB? I just gave you a softball, right? Give you the hard ones and throw you a softball here. It's a managed Cassandra with API and tools. It's a local in-memory version of Cassandra. It is a cloud-based IDE. Oh, it's a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Familiar with unit testing tools for GraphQL, but I am so certain that they exist because Netflix doesn't do stuff that they can't test. So
yeah, as a matter of fact,
I know there's got to be some great open source tools
yes,
out there.
in both the DGS framework and the Apollo client, they have testing. It's not, obviously you could tell we wouldn't have had the time to even touch that, but both of those do have already testing frameworks and harnesses and stuff like ready to go for you. It's a whole rabbit hole, right? So
hey Harshada, the Netflix app that does the follow-on, that is a Node.js backend. So it uses Astro directly, and you'll be able to play with it. We got a link to it in the workshop. So
All right, so the correct answer here, it is a managed Cassandra with API and tools. You're using the Graph API today. Awesome, looks like the majority you got that right. So let's take a look at our leaderboard. What has happened in our leaderboard?
Methla, we will probably improve this one, and we're also going to work on really improving the Netflix one so that they're both more accessible. But we might do an advanced GraphQL one, you know, when we add new features, for sure. Like federations coming up, we might have a schema first method of accessing the data. As more things come up, we'll definitely make more content.
All right, so Pankaj. Fastest time again, Pankaj. Actually maintains the lead to lock in second. Oh, Arturo, you're so... Okay, there's one more question. You can still get third place because I just want you to get that because you were so there. And then I see Saham is in third and Ajay is right there on Saham's heel. So let's see what happens here. Last question. All right, last one for all the marbles. Let's see what happens. In GraphQL, how do you change data or execute actions? Insert update, a transform, mutation, or variation?
And I'll take this to answer the question of certificates. What we have certificates for right now is Learning Cassandra and Cassandra Admin. We have tons of other classes that you can get badges. If you subscribe to our channel, which we love people to subscribe to our channel, you can look at all the other classes that we've done. We do this weekly, multiple times a week, and you can learn all sorts of cool stuff.
All right, so the correct answer was mutation. It looks like the vast majority. See, when the vast majority of the folks get the right answer, I feel like we did our jobs. I'm glad. So yes, mutation is the way that you're going to change data or execute actions. So what happened? This is for the win. The top three winners will get our... Yeah, let's see what happened to Arturo. Not that Arturo is the only one we care about, you know, like... Oh, so Pankaj takes the lead. Congratulations, Pankaj, with Vishnu comes out of nowhere and jumps into second, and then Ajay takes third. Congratulations. So if you are Pankaj, Vishnu, or Ajay, take a picture, take a screenshot of your phone right now, because I'm going to show you a slide in a second. You're going to want to email that to jack.fryer@datastacks.com, because that is how you're going to get your voucher for swag. Awesome. So again, I'll leave that out here. Another for Pankaj, Vishnu, and Ajay. Oh yeah, we're Saber Logs. We are just about to do that promo credit. Yeah, the promo code. Yep. So this is the part for those of you who are in the beginning. We're asking, like, hey, can I get a, like, do you have certificates or whatever? And that's what Kirsten was just talking about. We're just about to drop that, right? So that's a thank you for coming with us to the workshop. Now, there's one other part in here. Is I just go on with a couple slides. We'd like to know what other topics, languages, or frameworks do you want us to cover in the future, and then I'll leave that up so you all can answer, and then let's just talk about a couple things. I'm just going to pop through here. All right. Blah, blah, blah. We did all that. All right, here we go. So for our top three winners of the swag quiz, jack.fryer@datastacks.com. That is who you want to email to get your voucher for swag. All right, so make sure you get that. If for some reason you don't catch this or something, come reach out to me on Discord or something like that. But yes, jack.fryer@datastacks.com. All right, now for the voucher, okay? Separate from swag and everything like that, and as a thank you for coming here and being with us today, scan the QR code or just use the link, and that will bring you to a form, and you have two choices. One, you could, in fact, choose one of the learning paths in Academy. And by the way, everything in DataStats Academy is completely free. Again, all of our learnings and all that are always free. And what that'll do is these learning paths, either the administrator certification for Cassandra, developer for Cassandra, or Cassandra, which is Cassandra on Kubernetes for those of you operators out there. All of these actually have certifications that you can get, and they normally cost $145 each attempt. The voucher will give you 2 free attempts, and they can be used any way you want, right? So let's say you want to take the admin one, you pass it, you're like, oh, I'll go for dev, go for it. Or maybe you go for Cassandra and don't quite make it the first time, you can just retake it, right? That's 2 free attempts for you. So scan that code to get it. There is another piece on the form that if you want to get some Astro credits, you can also do that. Now, the cool thing is that everything you did on Astro today, for millions of reads and writes, I think it's 80 gigabytes of storage and stuff, is totally free, right? And that stays free indefinitely. So you can just use that free tier. Use that for your database and stuff like that. The credits come into play after that if you ever go into a point where you're expanding past what the free tier gives, but the free tier is pretty darn generous. So again, scan that code to get free stuff that we want to give you.
And I want to point out also, also please, again, subscribe to our channel. If you are going to go for those certifications, which are great, we didn't talk a lot about Cassandra, but if you know Cassandra, it's super popular among most of the largest companies. So it's a great thing for your resume. But what I was going to say is we do have classes that are specifically prep for that certificate test. So, we go through and we talk about the different things that you'll be asked. So you're much more likely to pass that if you check out one of our workshops.
All right, I'm just responding. To a question, feel free to...
I don't know when Cedric is next scheduled. He's a very busy man.
Yeah, right. All right, so for the homework, by the way, again, the homework is at the bottom of the repo. If you go to once you get to the end, there's an anchor that brings you back up, but don't forget the homework is also that homework section in the repo. Everything that you need there for the homework is there. What we ask you to do in this case is just go ahead, make a show, add a show or genre of your choice. Just modify something, just do a mutation and show that in the React app, right? It actually should be as simple as modifying one of the mutations that you use in the workshop, right? Just show us the result of that. That's really all you need to do. And I really, really encourage you to finish the homework part of step 9 through step 9, because that gets into the error handling part, and it's just a nice feature of GraphQL. We also have a whole new set of, another set of workshops that are coming. We do these every week, as Kirsten was mentioning. So we have an introduction to NoSQL databases that's coming up. A designing and planning cloud migration is awesome for folks that are more on the ops end. And then we have another one with React and such like that as well. So again, those of you who maybe are new to React, that could be a good one to take a look at. If you want to know a little bit more about more NoSQL databases and stuff like that, including Cassandra, the intro to NoSQL databases is as good as that. So definitely something to check out. We're doing workshops every week. Join us on Discord. Again, you can do bang Discord in the channel there, in the YouTube chat. That'll bring us here. This is where you can continue the conversation, especially if you have follow-up. Come reach out. We're here. We want to hear from you. And with that, thank you all so much. Thank you, Kirsten. And it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure doing this. This was a fun one, honestly.
Before we go, I want to tell Tasid that yes, we are working on Python, and that will be coming up in the next month or so. We'll have a workshop that includes Python.
Awesome. And with that, thank you, everybody. And take care. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye. And as always, don't forget to click that subscribe button and ring that bell to get notifications for all of our future upcoming workshops.
Imagine a being gifted with powers from the goddess of Cassandra, who grew those powers until she could multiply at will, move with limitless speed, and unmask hidden knowledge. With those powers, she was able to fully understand the connectedness of the world. What she saw was a world in need of understanding. From that day forward, she sought to bestow her powers on all who came into contact with her, empowering them to achieve wondrous feats.